to hear about the expertise and the insights from the people we're going to have coming up on stage. We've got a short video as well. My name is Emrys Shoemaker. I'm the head of practice on policy advisory at Caribou and have been privileged to support UNDP's work in this area, developing the model governance framework for legal identity and this assessment framework for data exchange systems. Data exchange systems are a crucial part of ensuring that DPI is safe, inclusive, and serves everybody, public value, and serving public interest. And one of the things that we're going to learn about and hear about today is how that's actually taking place in practice. We're going to hear how that's making a difference in people's lives. We're going to hear about how it's being deployed and how it's being developed and designed to ensure that digital public infrastructure is safe, inclusive, and serves public interest. One of the things that has come out of this work is the importance of making sure that there are clear guardrails to support the protection and inclusion of all actors and stakeholders within the deployment of data exchange systems. And this has been really important to think about as we've gone through the process of developing the assessment framework to make sure that it builds on UNDP's commitment to safe and inclusive development. And that's a really strong mandate that UNDP has in this area. Before we go on, I'd just like to ask those in the audience, who's heard of data exchange systems? About 2/3. Who could explain and define what a data exchange system is if I invited you to come up onto the stage? I won't. This makes this panel all the more important. I saw 3 hands go up. So I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to share this work with you. UNDP's work around developing this assessment framework for data exchanges has been underway now for some time. There have been the development of the tools that we're going to share with you and the application of those tools in a number of contexts, as we're going to hear from our panelists. So it's really important, I think, that we see how this is an opportunity for learning how these have been used, but critically learning how we can develop them and make them more useful and support the work that others are doing. And so as a framing for this conversation, I'd like to say that we really welcome feedback. We'd really welcome comments, suggestions on how these tools could be made as useful and even more useful than they currently are. And there's also really strong interest here in making sure that these are picked up and used. So we'd really welcome if there's interest in applying these in your context, using them for your own work. These tools are available. There's a website, as we're going to see, and there's a lot of support from within UNDP to enable that, as we're going to hear shortly. We're going to see a quick video to give us an oversight and insight into the data exchange assessment framework. Then we're going to hear from the Chief Digital Officer, Rob Opp at UNDP, and then we're going to move into our panel to hear from the different experiences around data exchange systems. So if I can ask the team to play the video.
Data exchange system, in many ways, is like a public library. Each library holds its own collection of books, just as different ministries, private organizations, or civil society groups generate and store their own data sets. Libraries are connected through a shared catalog, with established structures that provide details on resources available, manage their circulation, and facilitate access. Within a data exchange system, governance, much like the chief librarian, ensures that access is fair, materials are well maintained, and everything is handled responsibly. When governed well, a data exchange system enables safe, equitable data flows that foster innovation, enhance public services, and empower communities. But unlike books, When governance fails in the data world, it's not just a few pages lost. Safety is threatened, security is compromised. Accountability disappears with real consequences for people and communities. This is why governance of data exchange systems is essential, so people can truly benefit from safe and inclusive digital public infrastructure. When we treat data as a public good, we must be extra careful with how it's collected, shared, and used. The UNDP governance framework for data exchange systems builds on the principles of the DPI safeguards. It's designed to help countries ensure that their data flows are fair, right-based, and resilient, functioning as a true public good.
I hope you all got a chance to capture the QR code. It'll take you to the website and the resources that we're pleased to share. To give even more insight into UNDP's work in this area, I'm pleased to invite Rob up to the stage to give a few remarks. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. Thank you for coming. It's good to see as many people that have come out because, as Emrys was just saying, sometimes data exchange systems, which are a core element of digital public infrastructure, are a little less talked about. And yet there's well over 100 countries that have either implemented or are implementing data exchange systems right now. And so I think, in a sense, they deserve more attention than they have received so far. And this is one of the reasons why UNDP has leaned in this space to look at how do we make sure that data exchange and the utilization of data effectively is at the center of this discussion around DPI and, importantly, around safeguards for DPI. So given that so many countries are in the process of implementing, it is less a kind of question right now of if countries should do this. It's much more how they're going to do it. And the idea behind the framework that I'm going to present in a second is really about giving some very actionable ideas and really structuring a kind of process where you can think through, when you are considering putting your data exchange in place, how am I systematically considering the different elements related to inclusion, data protection, the privacy of people, and so on and so forth. In other words, putting people at the center. Because we know, and the video actually pointed out some of the dangers of and the challenges that we see around this. You know, there's problems with fragmented mandates often within countries. Ministries are not clear on who's doing what, which institutions are responsible. There's unclear structures as well. Maybe the policy framework is not fully in place. Maybe there's weak privacy standards or privacy legislation that is in place or not there at all. And so we need to make sure that as we're doing these pieces of work, that we're really doing this in a comprehensive way, because the tendency, of course, is for each country to do it alone. And in fact, there's so much practice that is accumulating out there, we need to try to bring that together. So the framework is already there, and I just want to give a very quick introduction to the main three pillars of it. And if we just start with the inclusive data sharing in the yellow, this is all about how data can and should be shared and used for public good. And it's a lot of the kinds of measures around preventing discrimination in data. For example, making sure that there's disaggregated data by gender, by demographic, by geography, being aware and transparent about the impact of connectivity gaps. So if the people are not connected and you're collecting data on the basis of a sort of population that's got a fragmented picture of connectivity, how are we making sure we're compensating for that, or we're understanding that gap? The fair and trusted relationship bubble is more about how do we really build trust in the data governance of a country. It's about the kinds of responsive and participatory legislation processes or regulation processes. It's about ensuring that redressal mechanisms are in place so that if people have questions or concerns, they know where to go and they can actually get answers or get a response. And it's about making sure the institutions are in place that can manage those processes as well. And then finally, when it comes to the safe and efficient data management, this is understanding how to make sure that we're using data as effectively as possible. And there's a lot of content in here about open data standards and protocols, open methodologies for data collection. How are we protecting our data, the privacy issue that I mentioned before. And so together, those three pillars are meant to really form a comprehensive picture. And if you did take the QR code and you go into the website and you can start to see the breakdown, you'll see it's basically in the form of a number of questions and then identifies some of the implications and parameters you should be thinking about. So it's really meant to be a very usable and practical tool. And as Emrys said, this is the work that UNDP, but much beyond UNDP, with our partners across the UN system and into civil society, with government institutions themselves, we encourage everyone to embrace this framework. It is meant to be a public good. It is meant to be used and evolved. And that's another invitation that I want to make, which is for all of you to test this, use it, let us know what's not there, let us know how we can improve it, because we do plan to evolve this over time. And I think the final thing I would say is that data and this issue of data exchanges, I think data's having a moment right now, actually. Because although data exchanges have been spoken about less, the interest around artificial intelligence and being able to ensure that AI systems are fed with accurate, reliable, sufficient data is actually the focus of a lot of attention right now. And so, again, I would ask all of us, let's use that momentum. Let's really understand how we can embrace this and make sure that we're not just being carried away by the AI hype, but we're actually putting in place the foundations of a safe, inclusive, and people-centered approach to data governance. Thank you very much. I think that we're going to have, Emrys is going to come back. We're going to have a panel now with the country examples, and we're pleased to be joined by representatives of government, but also other academic institutions and other civil society to really shine light on the different aspects of this. And again, thank you for coming.
So if I ask for a show of hands, who has a better understanding of what a data exchange system actually is? Well, yes? Fantastic. Thank you, Rob, for that overview of both the framework and also where it sits. It's important, I think, to recognize that this sits within the DPI safeguards work and is an important tool to realize the objectives of that as well as you saw through the presentation. I'd like to invite our panelists up to the stage. We have, as Rob said, a really rich group of people to share insights into what's happening with data exchange, what some of the uses for it are, what some of the challenges are in implementing it, and some of the applications that we can see, particularly around AI. So without further ado, please come and join me on stage. Okay. So we're going to hear from our four panelists, and I'm very pleased to introduce Christina Rao from United College London, UCL, from Ayanda from the Central Bank here in South Africa. Really a real privilege to have you on the stage with us. Jonathan from Dial, and Nakul from Al-Wadwani. I'd like us to start a little bit with looking at how data exchange systems are taking shape, a bit of a global perspective. And Christina, you're leading UCL's work mapping the DPI implementations around the world, including looking at where we're seeing data exchange systems. Tell us what you're seeing with that mapping and what kind of trends there might be in terms of how that's being deployed around the world.
Thank you, Ambrose. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for making it to an after-lunch session on the last day. We're going to keep asking this question, but let me ask this one more time just so I can see a count in the room. How many in this room can explain what a data exchange system is? Okay, quite a few. I'm going to do the same shtick and try to explain it in different words because we've been trying to map it, and let me see the count change after that. So before I do that, just maybe 60 seconds with a story. I almost didn't make it here to the summit, even though I work with CoDevelop, part of the organizing team. I come from India, and we need a visa to come to South Africa, and visas have been challenging, and obviously processing so many visas in a short span of time is challenging for the South African government, so totally understandable. But the story goes, I didn't get a visa because it was rejected the first time I applied, and it was rejected because they required a certified bank statement that I haven't gotten my hands on like 10 years because no one's ever asked me for a certified bank statement. All my bank statements are digital, and I just go click, click, click on net banking, and it produces a statement, and I've submitted that to whoever has asked for it. And that's done the job, but this time the visa required me to submit a stamped and signed by my bank manager kind of bank statement, and I didn't even know how to get access to that, so I just submitted the non-certified one. It was rightfully rejected. I eventually got my hands on a bank manager, asked him for a bank statement, he emailed it to me, and I submitted it, and I'm here and grateful now. But I'm trying to highlight what data exchange looks like. In this process, they wanted me to physically print the document with a blue pen, sign it, show that it's stamped, and me physically submitting the statement, printed statement, at the embassy or visa office, and only that would be considered a verifiable document, a credible process, and the exchange of data pretty much happens in person. Now, obviously, not everyone can get their hands on this. It's extremely time-consuming, and this is why we're sitting here and discussing data exchange in the first place, because doing this activity of sharing a document that can be verified is so important, not only to me coming to South Africa, but also to economies and how you participate in society and access services. And so at UCL, we've been thinking about how is this function of data exchange facilitated by digital public infrastructure, and how are governments across the world facilitating this process? So typically, when we started thinking about this, we said, where is X road in the world, and how many can we count on the map? Because when you think data exchange system, you very rightfully think X roads. Where are the X roads? Now there are new models also, and luckily we started mapping not from the perspective of where are only X roads, but how are governments doing it? So they may use X road as one of the models, but what are other models to do it? And we realized that in order to track data exchange as a function, we were not looking at one or the other model. We were looking at what is implied when data exchange happens. Some implications are there's real-time data sharing, real-time being the key word. There's some sort of access to information with consent and data protection. And there is some sort of information sharing at scale, so that you don't have to continually give access to this activity to happen, but it happens pretty much when service delivery needs to take place instantaneously. So we looked at this value chain and we asked, how are different governments doing this? We started mapping it. And of course, the the framework that you're looking at that the UNDP has facilitated and put together does an incredible job of writing in safeguards in every part of this process. But we also looked at just the technological artifact of which systems enable this. And Robert has already quoted this. There's over 100 countries in the world facilitating data exchange. They're not doing it in the same level, in the same way. Of the 100, there are about, let's say in Africa, there are models around enterprise service buses as well as X-Road. In the Middle East, there are no X-Road deployments that we could find. There's enterprise service buses and there's API managers. Now, I'm not a technologist. The people in this room who are technologists can come and tell me how an API manager is different from an enterprise service bus and how they facilitate different kinds of data exchange. And they will be right. But when we're looking for access to information in real time, all of these models are facilitating it. And what's an important takeaway is the governance that is written into these models change too. So when we're discussing data exchanges, and a provocation for the panel is to think of governance that's written into technology features, which are prevalent in different models of exchange of information, as well as governance that's written into policy features that get superimposed on these systems. And we've studied this at UCL through the DPI mapping project. The number right now is 103 countries across the world have DPI-like data exchange systems. We say DPI-like because based on who you're talking to, the definition of DPI sometimes changes, and that's okay. But you can do that filtering with our data set. And this number will continuously evolve as our understanding of this very critical piece of almost invisible middleware in country DPI systems evolve. And I hope we can move towards a better understanding from here and move forward. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Christina. I think it's really helpful to be reminded, and a really important point to take away, that there's many different kinds of data exchanges. That, as Christina was saying, X-Road, the one that comes to mind, but there's many other kinds. And these other designs have different implications in terms of the ability to realize elements of protection and security and so on as well. And I think a really helpful reminder, Christina, of the importance of thinking about protection both in terms of design, but also in terms of the policy frameworks around it as well. Jonathan, if I can turn to you in terms of, and to hear a little bit from you, you've been studying specific data exchange deployments in a number of different contexts. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you've learned and what some of your takeaways were from that work.
Sure. Thanks, Emirates. Thanks, Emirates. Yeah, so we've been looking at this issue for maybe a half dozen years now. As Rob said, this has been an issue in the emerging DPI space now for a few years. But I agree, it's definitely having a real moment right now, driven by the need to have AI-ready data ecosystems. But yeah, just to talk a little bit about the evolution of what we've seen. So we did some research back in 2019, 2020, which, again, tracking very much with what Rob said, was really looking at what is this? What's needed to have trusted data sharing ecosystems? And what we found, very much aligns with what Christina's saying, is this isn't just a question of interoperable technology solution. This really is about an integrated ecosystem approach where policies, laws, regulations are reinforcing what we see in technical architecture. The technical architecture is reinforcing what we see in those policy, laws, and regulations. We have the institutions that have the independence and budgetary sustainability to oversee and enforce those policies and laws, and that there's an active and engaged civil society who's really advocating for the interests and rights of people in that system. So those are the kind of what we've seen is needed for that trusted data sharing ecosystem. A few years later, we decided to look less at the maybe more mature data sharing systems and take a look at some of the emergent systems, looking at Ghana, Bangladesh, Uganda, for instance. And what we saw was there was increasing understanding of the importance of having these systems in place, but now there was this real emphasis on the how, right? And one of the biggest things that emerged that was different than a few years earlier in this journey of understanding and observing the maturity of data sharing systems was sustainability. And I didn't see it at the top line of the framework, but I actually see it as very much a trust issue. If you're building these data exchange systems to be a driver of society-wide essential services, if you don't have that sustainability built in, that's a trust issue. I think there's a lot that goes into the question of sustainability. There's, the need to design from the beginning with sustainability in mind. A lot of data exchange systems remain project-based, and there's often CapEx upfront to build them, but the long-term maintenance and sustainability, frankly, is still being figured out. I think a really interesting question that we've just started to get into a little bit, which I would love if others have thoughts on this, but I haven't seen a lot on it yet, is the pricing of data and how that can create business models around data exchange for data that is driving public value specifically. Commercial data obviously has figured that out. Amazon Web Services has, nano pricing of every data bit that is exchanged. But what does that look like for public value data? So I think that's a big question, building off of what we've seen over the last couple of years. And I would say, and maybe this is a precursor to future DPI summits, but I think the one last thing I'll say is about interoperability. So we've heard a lot about interoperability, that data is, not just the data exchange layer as a system, but DPI is an engine of driving data creation and governing all of the resultant data from an effective DPI system. It has to be part and parcel with doing good DPI. And I think in those conversations about interoperability, there's an opportunity to have more of a conversation about the kind of convergence of governance, not just the convergence of the standards and the technical systems. And as something that is so cross-cutting, I think often there are questions from countries about what are the right institutional arrangements to help drive some of that convergence. Often I think ICT ministries, digital authorities can be a default in this, but I think there's also a lot to learn from sectoral, how health or financial data is already being shared and governed within sectors, and bringing together a more integrated approach, I think has to be part of that whole government model.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think that points around the importance of ensuring that data exchange systems, DPI in general, are trusted is a really important takeaway. And it's certainly a theme, I think, that's been running through many of the conversations that I've been hearing over the last few days here as well, how important it is to maintain that trust and the challenges and actually in ensuring it. We'll come back to some of that. Ayanda, you're the Chief Data Analytics Officer at the National Treasury here in South Africa, and you've really been on this incredible journey of establishing a data exchange. And I think I'd love to hear about the impetus behind that, where the journey began, and some of the challenges that you've faced as you've been going down that road.
It's always good hearing other people and, the different definitions. So I'm now wondering where do we start? For us, the journey has been a very fast-paced journey. We had started, I think, a few years before, but as with many countries, people have different starting points. Even when we've engaged with other countries, some people start more with a digital identity and, a payment system. But in our environment, the work that we were already doing on trying to share data between institutions predates our efforts of putting in a digital ID. So in many ways, our journey started before the DPI journey, which is why I think we have had quite a bit of an identity crisis as the Mzansi Exchange. Officially now we've launched in October as the Mzansi Exchange, but when this initiative started, it sounded more like, we were building a data lake. It wasn't clear what we were doing, and it's because it was being driven by the National Treasury, and our ultimate interest as Treasury is efficiency, policy making. But as we were thinking about the elements that you need to create the kind of data ecosystem we wanted, everything pointed towards a data exchange. And so when the digital transformation roadmap came in place, and going into the start of 2024 as well, we then decided, let's actually explore what international examples are there, what exists that we can learn from, because we identified the opportunity to leapfrog a lot of processes as well, because so many people had been ahead of us. As you say, there are quite a lot of countries that have been on this journey. So we started with just a design phase where we explored the different alternatives. We landed on building our Mzansi exchange off of the X-Road infrastructure. From our perspective, X-Road facilitated, a lot of the security elements that we needed, and setting a standard that people would have to meet, which I think was really, really important. But obviously, it's different when you're building an exchange concurrently with your digital identity as well as payments. So, we've had to create a digital services unit, which you've heard from quite a bit during this conference. And the data exchange layer sort of underpins all of these different applications, which are more citizen-facing. So it's always very difficult to allow the citizens as well to see how the exchange affects them. So we have tried to communicate it, though, over time, as an analogy that we use as a train station. So our exchange is almost like your railway network, where you have a data set that you need to join. You have your home or your office space. You go to a train station if you want to go to another destination. The train station in the X-Road environment is a security server, because you need to deploy a security server in each institution's environment to be able to share data with them. The exchange, more importantly, isn't a data repository. It's not a central data deposit, It's just the mechanism that you're sharing data from one institution to another. So the security servers actually speak to each other in that environment. So what we've been busy with over this year, and now officially as we're going into our pilot, is setting up use cases that allow us to deploy these security servers, as well as our central server as well, which includes our trust services. So you need an auditable log when you share data on the exchange. That is underpinned as well with a timestamping, as well as a certification authority, just so that you know that the information that you've sent is verified. It comes from where it's sent from, and the person who's accessing it has got the credentials and the right to access that data. And to govern that whole ecosystem, we've also underpinned that with a number of, I'd say, task teams that we have running at the moment. We have one on developing the actual exchange. That's the team that's deploying security servers in various environments. We also have a task team where we've partnered with UNDP, actually, who are helping us from the start build with safeguards in mind. So we have a legal and governance work stream, where this, I think, is a fundamental, and because we're in this session as well, I think it's one of the biggest pillars to get right from the start. You have to build with privacy in mind, with protecting people's data, with human rights, balancing efficiency that we want as Treasury, but also protecting the rights of the citizens. One really interesting point as well that came up in our launch last month was, what if citizens don't want to give consent for their data to be shared on the exchange? We still need to make sure that there are opportunities for people who do not want to sign up to be on a digital platform to be able to go to an office where they can still access that. So I think, creating governance frameworks that empower citizens to consent to their data being shared. For us, this is fundamentally under the real-time data sharing component of our exchange. That's where we are focusing on, an example. One of our use cases in that space is our social protection agency. So our grant beneficiaries, we're looking at how we can allow or empower our social protection agency to verify data from multiple organizations. They currently have a lot of administrative data that they check or verify when they're onboarding a beneficiary. We're leading with the Home Affairs example. For us, that's our identity office, and because there's we've had a lot of issues around, are we paying the right people? Is there double dipping in the grant system? Is everyone alive that you're paying? So weeding out all of those issues as our primary use case. And what's helped with that is you start thinking about the people who are actually going to be using this, not just as a means of facilitating data moving between departments, but actual citizens. And the key thing there is, even in planning our governance structure, we're planning on putting in place a pilot governance council, where we're hoping that we can have representation from multiple stakeholders, including multinational organizations like UNDP who we're working with, but also perhaps civil society as well as something that we can explore, just so that we can open up the discussion a bit and think about what this looks like long term when we have the legislation changes that are required put in place. We're working on what legislation in this new ecosystem would look like, because in South Africa, yes, we have our privacy law, which is the Protection of Personal Information Act, but it helps in as far as making you not reveal someone's identity, but it's not necessarily enabling and encouraging for government departments to actually make their data easily available. I think people are really concerned about contravening POPIA, so I think guidance, especially on what are the exemptions to being able to share data comfortably on an exchange, where you're not going to come back and be hit across the knuckles by our information regulator. But that said, I think the main interesting component, I think, that we've had to think through a bit and are currently discussing and finalizing is when we are past our pilot phase, which is going to run for a year, we will probably need to have, an independent recourse or grievance process that we put in place, because if something were to happen, and I'm hoping that all of the measures we're putting in place mean that we won't have people's data and privacy revealed, we won't have data errors that lead to people being excluded from social grants, for example, or cybersecurity attacks. But should something happen, citizens need to be able to be empowered to raise concerns and have those heard and addressed. So that's another component that I think we're really thinking through. And then maybe to touch on some of our other use cases just quickly, since we're just sharing. What has been really interesting for us, I think most traditional data exchanges just focus on the real-time component or real-time data sharing component. For us, we've split it up into 4 different categories of data sharing. So there's the real-time component, which I've talked to, but we also have data for operational purposes. This could be unit-level data verification for compliance and regulation, but also it could be bulk data that's required for certain processes, certain policy, and certain operational requirements. Our use case in that space at the moment involves our Office of the Accountant General, so our financial systems team, as well as the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer with our procurement data. We're trying to improve the way that they share, government expenditure data using the exchange and what that would look like. We also have data sharing for research and policy-making purposes. For that, we've established a National Treasury Secure Data Facility where we anonymize or de-identify the data. We have sensitive tax data records that we house there. We are trying through this process to see, as we develop data dictionary and metadata, it'll make it easier to convert some of the operational and admin data into data that can be de-identified and used for research. And then the last component for us, which is the most exciting, is the open data outputs that we're trying to develop through this process. Currently, we have spatialized the tax data, and we have a spatial or spatial economic activity data. It's an open data portal that anyone can go, especially cities and municipalities use a lot of that data for their planning purposes. So we're hoping to produce a lot more aggregated, non-sensitive data sets that even a citizen could extract from our systems and what we're building. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ayanda. There's so much in what you said. The last point you finished on in terms of the open access and open data is a really nice segue to to our next speaker. But I just want to pick up on one point, which was a big takeaway in how you've approached thinking about data exchange for me is you really put people at the center. And you've put people at the center in terms of the design and the approach you've taken to bringing people into that process, as well as putting people at the center of accountability and oversight as well. And the governing council and so on that you talked about, I think, are really strong examples of that. It's a very inspiring approach. So thank you so much for sharing. Turning to you, Nakul, as Anda was saying, they're really looking at making data open and accessible. Clearly, making open data accessible for innovation, for developing new tools and applications is critical, as Rob was saying right in the beginning, particularly for AI. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Wadhwani and how data exchanges that can make data accessible can support this, and what it takes to make AI that's safe and responsible. What kind of data exchanges can support that?
Thank you for that question. And my co-panelists touched upon some really important points. You know, we have seen a lot of data repositories, data libraries, and of course, data exchanges in action now. What we have also seen is a lot of conversation when it comes to governance, a lot of conversation around the technical part of it, the policy part of it, process part of it. We still have a long way to go when it comes to the human part of it, the contributors and the beneficiaries. At Wadhwani AI, we extensively work on use cases that serve the population at large. I've had an opportunity to be at the field with various different types of users. I can share a couple of stories from the field that might be of interest. We were collecting a data set with a farmer community in a very remote part of India. And you know, I had just gotten off a conference which was about data security, data incentivization, data privacy, etc. Right? And I happened to speak very casually with one of the farmers, asked him, you know, there are a lot of people who come to you for data because everyone wants to develop AI. There are a lot of, repositories being built. Have you ever wondered what happens to your data? Do you deserve any compensation for your data? Have you ever, any of such thoughts came across your mind? His response was, if I can't eat it, I can't drink it, I can't live under it, I don't care for it. There was a fourth one as well. I'm going to skip that. But the point being, when we talk about all these governance structures, we are not keeping humans in the center. A lot of it, and we are talking about a population, and this is true for a lot of developing world. I've seen it firsthand across India. These people come with very different problems, right? My privilege is that my problem is to solve their problem. Their misfortune is that they have to live that problem. And that is something that needs to be built in. We were collecting certain data for an application we had built, and this was an application around maternal and child health that required some videos of the baby to predict some anthropometric measurements. And capturing head circumference was one of it to get the ground truth. And we realized that they were not very comfortable because in their culture, touching heads of the baby in the first few days is not considered good. Right? There were safety reasons for them, but there were also some religious reasons for them. And it would have been very easy for us to say that we could just miss that field and then just go ahead and say that this is incomplete data. But that was not actually incomplete data, that was delayed data. I could have come back and collected that data after a week's time. There are a lot of these cultural nuances, a lot of these local nuances that need to be built into governance framework to ensure the people who contribute to these data sets, the people who will eventually be the beneficiaries of what gets developed on these data sets, are well heard, are well represented in this governance framework, right? Education is a big part of it. Capacity building is a big part of it, right? But capacity building is not just training them. not just taking them to a meeting room or some conference room and telling them about what they are expected to know. But this is more than that. This is about active participation when you are building some of this work. And when we talk about AI, when we build AI for health workers, for teachers, for farmers, we ensure that we take all these people into those conversations. And we have learned it the hard way. We have made a lot of mistakes. I mean, we have done this for 7 years. We have built applications, collected data, only to realize that because we did not follow a consultative process with the user in mind, there were a lot of pushback, lot of resistance in leveraging some of the solutions we had built, right? And while these data exchanges will prove to be a big asset for a lot of researchers, for a lot of civil societies, private sector to build use cases that will benefit the citizens at large, we need to make sure that they operate in a way that takes into account what are the needs of the user, what are the pain points of the user, and how to protect their rights. And this is something that we very actively now advocate for. This is something that is a part and parcel of each and every step of our solution development journey.
Thank you, Nakul. I think your pointer towards specific applications for data that's being shared in contexts such as healthcare and so on is a really important reminder that what we're talking about with enabling data sharing to support public interest outcomes is real concrete applications in use. And that's a really important reminder. This is the main stage. This is the main stage auditorium. So normally this is very kind of set back, but I'd really like to make sure that we have a space for audience questions as well. So I'm going to take moderator's privilege and ask the first question, but I'd really like to invite those in the audience, if there's questions that you'd have for any of our panelists, if you want to clarify the definition of a data exchange, please do. But I'd like to pose a question to all of our panelists, which is, when we think of data exchanges, there's a really common tension between the value and utility that comes from sharing data, making it accessible across departments, downstream within different applications, making it open so that others can build innovative tools, services, and applications out of it, on the one hand. And on the other, making sure that that sharing of data is safe. It's inclusive, it protects people's rights, people's interests, and so on. What is one critical consideration that you would flag up as being the most important that should be borne in mind when we're thinking about designing and implementing data exchange systems? You've all shared a number of them that we could pick up on, but I wonder which one you would flag up as being the most important to share in mind.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, no, for me, I think the most important factor is ensuring that there's representation from the local community. And it cannot be individuals, I understand, but maybe local community aggregators which acts as stewards on behalf of the community that is contributing to that data. I think that will play a very important role to maintain privacy, security, but also create trust in the ecosystem so that whoever is then leveraging that data can be well assured that the community backs it.
Thank you.
Just choosing one is really, really hard. I would say, and I really appreciate the people-centered vision you laid out. I think when I think about that angle of data sharing, both genuine models of consent, you mentioned redress mechanisms, and transparency all come to mind. So I'm hedging a little here, but I think consent and redress are complex things. They are a lot of challenges to scale, to meet the scale of DPI. And while I don't think we should shy away from those challenges, I think maybe a simple answer to start is just transparency. Because I think what we have seen is different governments start their data exchange journey for different reasons. And if it really is maybe an efficiency story of delivering public services, that's still important for citizens, but it maybe is a little different than empowering citizens to act upon their own data or benefit directly from their data. And I think maybe this is a way to answer in a kind of minimum viable product way, but having some sort of portal, citizen portal, where people understand how their data is being used is kind of a minimum. And then you build on all these other more complex topics, perhaps.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan on transparency and, you know, keeping things open and updating citizens. But I guess what I'll highlight as a key consideration from my perspective, I suppose it's data access. I know we say data sharing a lot, especially when it comes to an exchange. But for the real-time data component, which is not data for research or the operational bulk data, for real-time verification, it's moving away from actual sharing of information, but access to information. So, you're applying a minimality in sharing just enough so that you have the information required to make the current decision and not having to share everything about every citizen with everyone who requests data from an entity, which is why I think governance protocols are really important to set a standard of what is really required if you want to prove that this ID number is a valid ID number, for example. So I think it's just enforcing that and having the right framework from the start for your different categories of the type of data that you're sharing. So, for the consent-based data, I think minimality is important and data access versus sharing. But for operational research, where you can de-identify the data, where it's not sensitive personal information, that I think, doesn't even require consent, but it's just ensuring that it is de-identified and encrypted in the right way, and you just govern how that is used.
Thank you. I think the point around being mindful of the different categories of data and how it's handled is a really important reminder of the complexity of data exchanges and how data is managed, different kinds of data is managed in different ways. Thank you. Christina.
Yeah, I think Jonathan and Ananda have said it as well as I could have. I'm thinking about model transparency a lot in terms of governments are not going to get it right for the very first use case or instance that they're trying to build a data exchange system. It's crucial that they try to reveal as much as possible about the design of the system as early on as possible so that relevant people can poke holes and try to make it better. But as this panel has been talking, the activist in me is activated. And I'm also thinking about state capacity a lot. And I'm thinking about all of the aspects of data protection, grievance redressal. All of these are sort of predecessors to the data exchange system itself and to the instance of data exchange. And saying that a context just has a data protection law is not enough. It needs to be enforced with a certain capacity and ability to coordinate across departments in mind. So I'd just say data protection capacity as an umbrella to make sure that whatever is technologically designed in the system is actually implemented in a larger governance ecosystem of institutions. And rights are protected through that implication.
Thank you, Christina. I think the reminder of state capacity is so critical. It's very easy to write a law, design a system, but to implement it, to deliver it, to ensure that it's being run with the relevant and appropriate oversight, et cetera, is really important. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. We have some roving mics. We have some hands. I can see 1, 2, 3. Please, if you have a mic in your hand, please ask the question and pass it on to somebody else.
Yeah, I already have a mic in my hand.
And please introduce yourself when you ask.
Yeah, so my name is Sunil. I represent IDS, Intuitive Data Solutions, emerging tech-based firm in India. We do work with universities in the capacity building. So very engaging panel, good thoughts coming from all the panelists, appreciate that. Well, my question is specifically to you when you told that capacity building is not just training, right? I do agree with that. It's not about making the people to sit in a room or do the kind of a building. What is the additional things that you suggest? And also, I would like to understand your thoughts on how to measure the outcome of that capacity building. What, are there any metrics or any defined KPIs as such that you say that we have successfully executed this capacity building activity?
Great question. Very pushing hard on the specifics of what kind of capacity and how to
Thank you.
measure that. If we could take a few questions and then we can turn to the panel.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jack Hilton. I work with Open Function, or OpenFN, which is a data exchange based on one of the many definitions of that. But we work very closely with X-Road and others on the kind of securitization and ensuring the safety and efficiency of data management. And we have a kind of visual workflow builder which allows people to see when data is being exchanged between different systems and then create reusable components which can then make it easier for software developers, but also increasingly less technical folks to integrate these different systems. And I guess from our perspective, and this is a big assumption, but on the assumption that we can create a safe and efficient data management system, I then think that a missing piece to our kind of analyses is like, what is the volume of data that is being exchanged between different systems? So I guess a question to the panel is like, has there been much research into that when we say that there are 103 data systems which have been data exchange systems around the world? That's cool, but like, what are the volumes of transactions, which is like a very auditable thing that we do all the time, and we can see how many runs have gone through Open Function, for example, in a given deployment. So yeah, just wondering if there's been much research into like how much data has been moving around a system, and is that a KPI that we should be tracking? Yeah.
Great question around how much data is being shared through a data exchange system. And I might almost add on a question to that, which is, what is it being shared for? What is it being exchanged for? I think those are often unasked questions, so great question, thank you. One last question before we turn to the panel. Yes, here. At the front. Great sprint to the front there, thank you.
Hi, my name is Gunjan Mansingh. I'm from University of West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica, and I also chair the Government ICT Authority of Jamaica. This question is for Christina. So data sharing platforms are being used both by public sector and private sector data stores. Now, each one is benefiting from that. Have you seen any economic models which people are monetizing and probably making some mechanism of ensuring they get the return on investment?
The question was around the economic models for data sharing. I think that ties back to Jonathan's point around sustainability as well. So 4 questions. What kind of capacity building and how do we know that that capacity is being built? What volume of data is being exchanged through data exchange? And I might add on to that, do we know what it's being used for? And thirdly, economic models of data exchange and how to make them sustainable. Any takers?
I can start. Offering some insights from the map. The map, by the way, I keep saying the map, assuming everyone knows what the map is. It's dpimap.org. It's a view of the state of DPI across identity systems, payment systems, and data exchange systems across the globe. And we're interested in prevalence. We've not tracked impact. We focus on prevalent because we've been dealing with the definitional issues around DPI and data exchange systems for so long that we wanted a common set of features to talk about when a bunch of different people say ID systems as DPI or payment systems as DPI. We wanted to ask, what do they mean by it? And so to speak to your question, Gunjan, in terms of the economic value of data exchange, the map has not tracked it, but we have some anecdotal metrics that have propped up, especially in the X-Road context. A lot of the mapping on the implications of the exchange of data are happening, one, at the administrative efficiency level, time saved in terms of administrative hours, costs saved to a certain department, costs saved to say a beneficiary, a citizen, an individual, in terms of accessing a service, given that the data exchange is happening instantaneously as opposed to a physical paper being exchanged or an MOU being signed between two departments so that data can be exchanged. So these are certain common metrics. I don't have them off the top of my head, but these are how some data exchange systems across the globe are reporting. But they're very variable. And what we're finding is that the value of data exchange systems as a component of DPI are mostly being reported in a very short-sighted way and not so much keeping into account what it means for, say, market participation, use of the same system by public actors as well as private actors, as well as in some instances, civil society. When a data exchange system is built, the assumption, at least in the DPI context, the assumption is that the use cases will be defined down the line. We just know that data needs to be exchanged. It needs to be exchanged without too many hassles about for what, with whom, in how long, to what end, etc. And a system for that exists so that it's a plug and play. So that means that the infrastructure is being built for certain outcomes to be met down the line, but those outcomes are just not being viewed from a long-term market building capacity or perspective. They are being viewed from a rather short-term efficiency angle. And the metrics for that exist, but the metrics for the long-term market building do not exist. The second point I will make is very few data exchange systems actually are built by the public sector for use by the private sector as well. There's usually need for additional MOUs to be signed or SLAs even to be signed for the private sector to access data within a publicly built and operated data exchange system. And it has its pros and cons because maybe the concept of the data exchange system in the public sector was built with certain public sector use cases in mind and certain data security and protection considerations in mind. And that may be true at a time, but in the spirit of interoperability and market participation, we need to open up that same repo and exchange system to more players now in order to unlock more value. And very few systems are actually allowing that. And the way we've been studying it is to figure out whether there are eligibility criteria for who can participate in the system and whether that's evident on the website of a government. And usually these systems are very opaque. They are treated as middleware. So very few governments are actually revealing information about who gets to participate. It's very likely through an executive order or a paper shared within departments that information about participation and eligibility is even shared. So tracking that is quite challenging because there's lack of transparency. But that's about the metrics and the state of data on data exchange systems.
Thanks, Christina. I just want to also put a flag, if you like, up for one reference that Christina made, which was to the importance of data sharing agreements and service agreements as well, that are critical to making sure that data exchange systems actually work, which I think speaks to this wider point that has been made throughout, which is that data sharing systems exist within institutions, and those institutions need to have agreements and relationships as well that are embodied in the data exchange system. And those are often some of the hardest to actually realize, to get different departments, different institutions to share the data that they actually hold. But Jonathan, I wonder on the sustainability point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is it's an outstanding question still. We do see some innovations happening around different ways of financially sustaining the systems, moving beyond development bank loans, the project-based model, to identifying budget revenue streams, public-private partnerships in a few instances. I will note also, I think there's a lot of innovation happening outside of kind of the national data exchange platform, which is worth keeping an eye on. I don't know if it will apply directly to this data exchange conversation at hand, but things like clubs good models, where there are groups that come together to say there is value in geospatial data, for instance, that has public value, and that can become a financially sustainable model if enough users of that data are buying into that model. So how that might apply to a national platform approach, I think remains to be seen. I think that's part of my point earlier that kind of collectively, I think we better need to understand the pricing of data, the value of data, kind of at a marginal level for databases that create public value. So it's a great question. I don't have the answer today, but one we're certainly looking into and love to work with others on.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm so glad nobody's asked whether data is actually the new oil and we can monetize it in such a way, because, but let's not go there. Ayanda, just on the sustainability point though, this is an approach, a system, a set of technologies that the government is investing in. How are you seeing this question of sustainability, and what considerations are playing into how that investment is being made?
So I think for us at the moment, I'll talk about what we would like in future, because I think it leans a lot to what Jonathan's been saying. But at the moment, it's picking use cases that help us realize efficiencies so that we can show value for the government actually investing more substantially in implementing DPI. So for example, cleaning out the system of double dipping, inefficiencies from having, you don't know who each person is, how many people qualify for certain things, limiting fraud and that type of activity. I think we're trying at the moment to prioritize use cases where we can realize efficiencies very soon. Some countries have estimated what their DPI journeys have saved them, like Estonia, for example, even if it's like the number of hours, or Brazil, that have a value, I think, that they've put forward. I think we're taking that path in terms of sustainability. If we can show that by implementing and investing in these systems, you can actually gain some efficiencies that you can redirect, whether you reinvest them here or you spend the money elsewhere, because we have limited budgets, obviously. But I just think that that's the proposition at the moment for us from a sustainability perspective. And it's not just at the moment implementing use cases for the sake of it. It's where we really need them. And then longer term, I think a lot of questions I've received is where we see the private sector, for example, coming in. I think that's something that we need to think about. What do private sector use cases look like? Once we're through this pilot phase, I think as we move into the post-pilot environment and over the next 2 to 3 years, the question is, how do we incorporate them? Are there models that we can learn from? I'm a bit disappointed because every time this has come up, there's never a clear answer, and it seems that it is something that's being explored. But it's also an opportunity and exciting to see what we can actually explore and think of on how can this be monetized at all? If not, are there other efficiencies that we can put forward for the private sector and expand reach and other ways that people can participate?
Thank you for that. I want to also just pick up on a point you made in passing, which is it's a case that continues to be made for ongoing public investment in DPI. We don't build DPI and they're done. DPI building digital public infrastructure is an ongoing process, a journey that requires continual investment, continual development, and continual support. It's a really good reminder of the ongoing nature of that transformation. I think there's also an open invitation. If anybody has a business model for a safe and rights-protecting way of monetizing publicly available data, please do share. I think there's an invitation there. But Nakul, if I could turn to you on the sustainability question, how are you seeing ways of using publicly available data in your work around developing different AI tools and services?
So, sustainability, when it comes to data, comes along with a lot of safeguards, right? If you want to ensure that there's a sustainable way of continue to use, let's say, a data set, right? There also needs to be an entire process around it to make sure that the data maintains its integrity, the data maintains it's continuously updated, and there are enough checks and balance around a continuous evaluation if there's a drift in the data that was earlier collected versus how perhaps that ecosystem is behaving now, right? So there are clear safeguards, there are clear checks and balances that need to be put in place if we are thinking about a sustainable way of continuous use of data. And that's what we've been deploying as well, right? You call it recycling of data, you call it reuse of data, but essentially there are a lot of data sets that we've been able to continue to reuse by maintaining some of these sanities. The other thing is the ability to use cross data. Is there an opportunity to leverage some data for a particular use case that potentially has a value as contextual data for some other use case? That's another way of looking at reusing, recycling of data, because that again ensures that we have extracted the maximum value from it.
Thank you, Nakul. I think that emphasis on ensuring that the safeguards are in place is a critical one, and of course a recurring theme and central to the assessment framework that UNDP has and its situation within the DPI safeguards framework. And I think as the tool is being used, it supports the identification and development of appropriate safeguards to support that. We've got a few more minutes, so maybe one or two last questions before we wrap. If there's anybody with an urgent question, a burning question, perhaps a new economic model for the use of publicly available data? Okay. I'm going to finish just by firstly saying thank you to all of my panelists for the rich insights into how data exchange systems are being used, the challenges, the trends, and the different applications. So actually a quick round of applause for their open sharing. And to conclude from my side, I think one theme that has come through really strongly is the importance of putting people at the center when we're thinking about what it means to make data sharing systems safe, inclusive, and rights protecting. The tool the assessment tool and framework that we've introduced and that UNDP is rolling out is, as Rob said, it's a tool that's very alive. So we're really keen that there are recommendations, feedback, suggestions, or invitations for its use in different contexts as well. QR code is up on the screen. Any questions, don't hesitate to be in touch with the UNDP team here or through the contact details that you can find on the QR code. As I said in the beginning, I think data exchange systems are the untalked about third leg in the stool, and yet the critical underpinning that connects so many of the different elements of DPI that make it such a valuable approach to thinking about digital transformation that can really serve public interest and create public value. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for so much of what you've shared, and look forward to learning more as the different journeys around data exchange systems are pursued and undertaken. Thank you again to my panelists, and thank you all for being here and sharing the important questions that you have. Thank you very much.